Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of NCompass Live. I am your host, Krista Burns, here at the Nebraska Library Commission. NCompass Live is the Commission's weekly online event where we cover any activities or topics that may be of interest to librarians. We do these sessions every Wednesday morning live at 10 a.m. Central Time. They last for about an hour, give or take, but they are recorded. So if you are unable to watch, to join us here on Wednesday mornings, that's fine. You can always watch any of our recordings. They are also posted on our website. We have the YouTube recordings, PowerPoint slides, any slides or handouts that people may have used in their sessions, links to websites that are mentioned in sessions. All of that is available after the fact when the recording goes up. We have sessions that are presented on our show from commission staff. We also have guest speakers, as we have today. This morning I have with us remotely from Grand Island, he's not here with me, excuse me, in Lincoln, excuse me, Steve Fosselman, the director of Grand Island Public Library. Hi, Steve.
Good morning, Krista, and good morning, everybody.
Good morning. And he's come up with what we think here is a pretty interesting project plan for getting his trustees up to speed on doing their job, working with the library. So he's going to share with us this morning what he's come up with. So I will just hand over to you, Steve, to go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thanks, Krista. Well, good morning, everybody out there. I'm here to talk to you about a case study that actually happened in our library, and it took several months to just work through. And in the meantime, we learned that this was not only a good way to solve a problem, but it was good trustee education as well. And so this morning I'll be going through that, and it's kind of a modified process using Six Sigma principles and using strategic planning principles, using facilitated discussion and workshop and other forms of education that trustees do all the time. But in this case, it just happened to be that I was the trainer. Now, I'm not a real expert in things like Six Sigma, and I'm not totally wedded to the idea of intended process. And as you can see there was one time I actually was in the delivery room with my wife, our first baby, and I think I was a little too process-oriented, and she reminded me of that. And so I would like to remind you that I'm not terribly process-oriented, but I like what it does. The process that we used uses professional judgment, but it also brings the board into the process with an intentional plan, and you actually follow the plan, and it has a result in an informed decision without intense pain or too many unintended consequences. We all know that what we do isn't perfect, and you will have unintended consequences, but if you allow yourself to really understand what you need to get done and how to do it, you may not be in the pickle that this seal is in. Liposuction's great unless you have to survive the winter with your skin. We looked at, in retrospect, we looked at the public library board certification process and found that this worked out just perfect for certification for us. The state's certification process, it employs ways to study up on improving your library and involving your board. And the librarian just depends on what you like to do and what your skill level is. In my jobs in the past, I've been in libraries for 35 years now, 2 previous positions, both with library boards, and now 21 years at the Grand Island Public Library. Maybe it's taken me 35 years to really understand that the librarian is best suited for knowledge and imparting that, and the board is best suited for wisdom in taking knowledge and making the wisest decisions. So we like to think that melds pretty well with the public library certification process in several ways that I'll show you. There are a lot of parallels, and we won't be going through this list, but there are a lot of parallels to ways that boards can be accredited in Nebraska, and the librarian's relationship with the board. And so as I think back on library workshops that maybe I could have taught, this might have been one of them. So we add to that the opportunity in our state for boards to be certified by going through the Nebraska Library Board Manual, and there are a lot of things in there that apply to the case study that we had. One was in matters of law, and I highlighted here a case study that could happen in a library. A smaller town outside our town is interested in receiving library services from our library. Our city officials are reluctant for us to do this because that town is outside our taxing area. How do we go about doing that? Another aspect of the manual is on budgeting, and we actually were going through our separate case study on program prioritization. And so we understood when we came to this, how can we best determine priorities for the budget and match those priorities with the different funding sources. But we had to apply that in this situation. And obviously, the board's responsibility to enact policies is the chief means to address opportunities and problems that arise. And here is our problem. In just a second, I'm going to... Okay, I have something that I can't quite see here, but that's okay. The problem in a nutshell for us is after 40 years of a good interlocal agreement with the county experiences budget problems after we report a major bookmobile repair need. And we went through good faith negotiations to try to arrive at a reduction in the interlocal agreement by reducing the outreach bookmobile services while maintaining the free library cards, which was the second part of our interlocal agreement. But the county unilaterally breached the interlocal agreement for all library services for Hall County residents outside of Grand Island. And, okay. And I'm having trouble, Krista, advancing my slide. Maybe I did something with that on the side.
Yeah, if you had clicked off of it, you might have, if you've clicked off of it, you might have no longer have it be like live. Try clicking somewhere on the slide again. Is the interface for GoToWebinar getting in your way?
Okay,
or,
yeah.
Because you can minimize that.
In the way.
Yeah,
it's
if
just
you... Yeah, use the little orange arrow at the top to minimize the interface, and that'll be out of your way. But then you have to re-click on the slides to try and advance them. If your mouse isn't working, you might need to use your space bar. Sometimes that works instead.
Okay, good. After we figured out the problem, we figured, and I hope everybody can see this, these are some approaches to making a complex decision. We all know that number 1 and number 2 are pretty typical. You present a problem. There's a free-for-all at the board meeting where everybody has opinions. Sometimes there's facts. You make a decision and you hope it sticks. Then the second option is present the problem. The director provides professional judgment, which is really important. Then it becomes a free-for-all. And once again, a lot of opinions, maybe some facts. But the third option is the one that we chose, and that's where we present the problem. We agree on a process that's going to take several monthly meetings where you don't make decisions. They're kind of like study sessions. Board members are free to comment and question, but largely they reserve judgment. And the director facilitates, has a lot of professional analysis, a lot of background information that educates the board about the problem. And through the process, there's real learning that occurs, and informed decisions are made with a lot fewer intended consequences. Okay. I'll give you my little picture in my mind of what things like Six Sigma and strategic planning and a learning organization mean to me. You go back and forth your entire career in making decisions, and with an organization in the culture where sometimes you start off where you are inside the box of acceptability for what a patron expects out of the library. And then you stray outside the box where you see things that, according to Six Sigma, are defects. But then you go back and you correct that, and even with a little bit of drift right here from the middle, it's still acceptable. And to me, that's what learning organization is the ability to move back and forth and make those decisions. And yes, I believe that thinking outside the box means that you open up the box, you look inside it, and you just put as much good, valuable treasures into it as you can. And it is a pretty big box. The mission of the library is a pretty big mission. You can accomplish an awful lot by doing, thinking outside the box in a little bit different way. There's a lot of other benefits that we had when we chose to do this process. The study sessions, they served as public hearings, and we did have a lot of attendance. I received more comments in this process than I've received altogether in the rest of my career. The public information was disseminated in a lot of different ways. The media was there all the time, and we decided to be real partners in making sure that on our website we included as much information about this as well. There were emotions. This is an emotional subject for a lot of people, but they were balanced, and people's emotions, they had more reasonable conversations as a fact. A lot of undue influences come into board discussions where sometimes board members feel like they might have the answer, or a director feels like he or she might have the answer. And you have to make sure that inside the boardroom and outside the boardroom, you keep those undue influences to a minimum. Everybody, all of our publics, were involved in the process, were aware and had sufficient input, and this really was a transparent process from the beginning. And our newspaper actually concluded that we had an upfront fold on this, and as you can see here, this is something from a columnist from our local newspaper that said, no, nobody should be surprised about this. Local government should always be this open, deliberate, and exacting because of the library board's process. They understood what we were going through. They heard everything that we were going through. They questioned everything we were doing, and we made sure that it was a really upfront process. Now, okay, here's our process. We had a resolution that was passed, and I'll show you that in a minute. And then we went into a preview through a slideshow. And then the next several months, we had a view of different aspects of making this decision. Nebraska card, non-resident use, legal service areas, budget and taxes. And then we went into the review period and made the determination. And here's the resolution, and it was very straightforward. It left no question in the minds of the public, the city, and the county where we stood after all those months of negotiation and then the breach. And that's, to us, that was an important point because, in effect, what it did was it declared a breach of contract and the beginning of our intended process. Here's the whereases, and here's the resolution that, yes, we would comply with returning the bookmobile. Yes, we would comply with, well, of course, not receiving any more money. And then after the final payment, we exerted our control and rightful control over the process. It was no longer a matter of negotiation with the county that had broken off. It was up to us to determine with the city, not the county, rules and charges to the inhabitants of Hall County residing outside the corporate limits. And so that was adopted, and then we coincidentally, we were involved in program prioritization budgeting with the city. And I'll just go right down to number 8 and number 9. The community outreach programs and services, that included Bookmobile. The non-resident services obviously was a major factor. And so even though that wasn't included in the previous slide as part of the process, it was certainly part of the process. And if I were to redo that intended process, I would include the program prioritization process as well. Well, we went into a lot of discussion where you might, at a board workshop, you might have a lot of information about the legal aspects of forming a library and extending service to a library. We went into that ourselves, and it was good review for some board members. It was a real eye-opener for other board members. Won't go into a lot of detail on this, but you take a look at some of the yellow on there, and when you establish a library in our state, maybe in all the other states, you establish it free of charge for the use of the residents of that entity that created you, and you set up rules so that outside the jurisdiction you can contract for use of the public library. And there are even ways to do county libraries, but we don't have a county library. Ours is a municipal library at the time with an interlocal agreement. And this is one of the state statutes that gave us that ability to enter into an interlocal agreement. The library board's use of a contract for schools and the school's ability to contract with the public library are certainly part of state law as well. The public library shall make its basic services available without charge to all residents of the political subdivision which supplies its tax support. To us, this obvious part of law was key because before the interlocal agreement was breached, it was the city and the county which qualified under this part of state statute. When the breach occurred, the city was the only party that was part of basic services available without charge to all residents. We are the political subdivision, the city is now only. Obviously, larger cooperative units of service in Nebraska are really important. They are enabled in law. There's a lot of informal cooperation, but as far as public library federations, it's still in its infancy. But cooperation is done, in this case, through law in creating a federation. And that creates jurisdictions that are taxable. So here's a couple snippets about the federation, and once again, reference to Interlocal Cooperation Act or the Joint Public Agency Act that I have a slide on in just a minute. So if you have a city or a county or a village or a township that chooses to affiliate with the federation, then those taxing entities provide service free of charge to the residents within the federation area. To us, this is another link. It shows the legal basis for providing service in our state and the legal basis for extending that service. Here it is about the other two means, the Interlocal Cooperation Act and the Joint Public Agency Act, just to show you that those are possibilities for us in the future as well. We took a look at a really good program that not all libraries in Nebraska are participating in, and we will in the future, but at the time that we reviewed the Nebraska card, which is reciprocal borrowing, another way to influence how libraries work with each other, not political jurisdictions that are taxing jurisdictions, but public libraries that work together and do interlibrary loan together, and other libraries through the state. They also have the ability to work together on reciprocal borrowing through the Nebraska card. So we had been involved in Nebraska card, and we continue to be involved in Nebraska card as a result of this study. Another really important part of our discussion was the demographics, and in a way you can see a lot of this is strategic planning, that you have your demographics, you show where your users come from, and it helps influence decisions on program prioritization and on decisions that need to be made about funding agencies and agencies that you need to consider charges for. But at the time, we were heavily used by non-residents, people outside of Grand Island. 19% of the population of Hall County is outside the corporate limits of Grand Island. So in a way, this is a vast majority of the population is Grand Island, but a reasonable percentage is outside the city. We could show at that time that 80% of the cardholders were inside Grand Island, 12% were inside Hall County, and 9% were outside of Hall County. I'll show you a map of our city in a few minutes, and it'll show you that our market area is pretty large. Borrowers in the last 3 years, the percentages were fairly similar to the cardholders. The checkouts from the library for a 1-week test period pretty much showed the same percentages. 12% were Bookmobile, and 88% were checkouts from inside the library. And then the checkouts inside the library during that time period, almost 80% came from inside the city limits, 12% came from the interlocal agreement, and 10% came from the Nebraska card agreement. Here it is. Here's that slide. I'll show you where Grand Island is. We're right in here, kind of at a crossroads of 4 counties, Howard County and Hamilton County, and I'm going to get the county wrong here, so I won't even say it, but there's several counties. Merrick County is right here. These 4 counties we draw a lot of population from, but we also get population from Buffalo and from Adams County, and then outlying counties we get less from. But the decision we were going to be making, we had to show, okay, what is the influence? What could be the possible influence of having a fee as well? Our usage would go down from these outside cities and the rural areas, and it did as a result of this. However, in showing this, it gave the board the opportunity to really review and understand who our users are, that there are a lot of users inside of Hall County who 1,722 households, 2,705 individuals that we could reliably count on inside our county but outside of Grand Island, and then fewer as you went through other counties, but a respectable number. Okay, going back, the board's discussion pertaining to non-resident services in the city's program prioritization process was certainly an important part of our budget discussion, but there were other parts of our budget discussion as well. The impact of revenue loss of $100,000 Nice way to look at it is 2/3 of our book budget, over 4,000 books, or our entire AV and electronic media and periodicals budgets, or 7% of our personnel budget, almost 2 FTE. Grand Island Public Library is one of 4 libraries in our area that has a book that had a bookmobile at the time. Columbus, Hastings, and Kearney, their counties were valuing their service of bookmobile and walk-in service at a much higher rate than we had been. So unfortunately, this was an oft discussed subject of getting up even to that $100,000 mark was a major accomplishment over 30-some years for our library in the 21 years that I have been. But the first bookmobile we had was, I think, 1962 with the help of the Nebraska Library Commission. And we had a really good service going. But for many of those years, the funding was around, it started off at about 11,000, maybe went up to around 30,000 about 20 years ago. And it has made a lot of improvement in the intervening years. But obviously, the county felt that the cost was too high, and in other counties, the cost was probably more in line with what you would see in other places. Assigning the value of a library card using the return of investment principle. Once again, we have done return of investment before, but in this case, the library board got a lot more involved in it using the library research service in Colorado, that model, and arrived at over $1 million, $1.2 million in value for our county non-residents. And this looks pretty reasonable compared to other return on investment analysis that other libraries have done. We also took a look as a board of assigning library value, cardholder value based on population, and that came up with about $500,000 in value to those citizens outside of Grand Island if they were taxed for library service on an equal basis with Grand Island residents. And that's a point that the Nebraska Library Commission over the years has made, that if you are going to have a contract with another jurisdiction, that you really need to be looking at placing the value of that contract equal to the value of the services that are being paid for by your primary jurisdiction. I don't see that a lot in Nebraska. Didn't see that the entire time that we had an interlocal agreement in our library. But sure, if we were to do this again, and it's always a possibility, I think this is a really important point, that you really do need to be looking at assigning an equal value for jurisdictions that are contracting. And then assigning cardholder value based on use. And this came up to about $240,000. Once again, if Hall County users were taxed equally with Grand Island users, in one way or another, the value that we had been receiving through our interlocal agreement was insufficient, and we had been negotiating for even less. As it turned out, the unilateral decision by the Hall County Board of Supervisors was something that did end up affecting the services that people outside of Grand Island receive. But it certainly wasn't any of the citizens' fault at all. We have really good relationships with all the non-residents, and so it's really kind of a sad story in that regard. But at the same time, it's an eye-opener for a library that when you have to make a decision, and it's based on program prioritization, it's based on other factors, that political decisions of how much money should be paid to a contracting jurisdiction, they really do need to be reviewed. And so looking back on this, several years prior to this, even though we were making good inroads in the budget, moving from around 30,000 to over 100,000, this is my professional assessment that I should have done more to prepare our library board for increasing that so that it was at least comparable to other libraries in the area. And another way of looking at assigning cardholder value based on a non-resident fee, taking a look at those 2,705 borrowers and assessing a $45 non-resident fee, which is comparable to the per capita payment in Grand Island, would give us about $121,000. And here, once again, this is going from $1.2 million to $500,000 to $240,000 to $121,000. One way or another, the value of the contract wasn't sufficient. The payment wasn't really meeting Nebraska Library Commission guidelines over the years, and so it's a good lesson for us in the future. I like to separate things into facts and factors. Facts like tax support from the principal political subdivision prior to the breach was the city and the county, even though the payment wasn't up to the per capita that we have in Grand Island. And that was due to another fact, the mutually agreeable interlocal agreement that we all went by, and the Nebraska card agreement in place for statewide access was a fact. There are a lot of factors that can be considered, and at the same time, they have to be weighed against the facts. Financial impact is a factor. Geography. You saw the map that we have and the close proximity of non-residents. The local sales tax as a factor, because our city, like many cities in Nebraska, does have an additional local sales tax on top of the state tax. And there are many kinds of exceptions that could be factors. Now, in the year 2009, the facts are that tax support continues to be Grand Island, but there are no other jurisdictions that are principal political subdivisions. The interlocal agreement was violated. Our library is still participating in the Nebraska card program in 2009. Well, we continue that today. And a major factor is that the financial impact to us is very high. $107,000, regardless of whether it was sufficient on a per capita basis, is enough money for us to lose a lot of our book budget, a lot of our AV budget, a lot of our people. It's hard to read this one, but what this analysis that we did, the library board and myself were working on, is figuring out, okay, does it necessarily follow that cities with local sales tax should provide free cards to non-residents? That was an emotional topic for a lot of non-residents in our area because they use the Grand Island retail market a lot, and they're wondering, why are my taxes not going to using the library? Well, the facts in our state and maybe in others don't bear out that. There are 20 libraries in cities over 2,500, and these libraries have local sales tax. They had county funding in 2007, and 75% of those libraries had out-of-county non-resident fees. There's some exceptions, but most of the libraries have a non-resident fee in those situations. And overall, 77% of all the libraries in cities over 2,500 charged some form of non-resident fee in 2007. We also knew that it was an issue and a factor for many of our non-residents that they could point to libraries that have a non-resident fee that was less than was being talked about in our library. That $45 figure had been talked about for a while. Didn't turn out to be that way, but it was close. But here are some examples. It's certainly a mixed bag, but there are plenty of libraries that are charging for individual cards, and the Omaha library has a household card. And as I understand through the process, however, there's some libraries that charge an individual charge for a card, but in effect they're household fees, because a lot of times one person in the household gets a card and everybody uses their card. So we decided to go with the household fee as our decision. This is one of the best ways that we were able to describe, not just between the library board and myself and the staff and the city, but the general public, that there are some really, really interesting and vital services like the library that are being provided, that it's common sense that there is a Grand Island Fire Department that's budgeted out of Grand Island funds. It's common sense that the county budgets the rural fire districts. Same with police versus the county sheriff. Public Works versus the county roads. Grand Island Parks versus the county parks. And the interlocal agreement that we had in Hall County. Legally possible, but when it wasn't budgeted by the county, it became a matter for us to consider a fee. So we, in preparation for the March meeting, we've been pretty much marching along with some objectives that were voiced during previous meetings and were tested at the March meeting. And as I look through the process in hindsight, this is what I came up with. First and foremost, we have a real concern and appreciation for everybody that uses the library, including people that live outside our jurisdiction. We made every attempt we could to provide service with them through an interlocal agreement. And establishing non-resident fee is necessitated by the county's breach of contract, left us with no funding, no legal agreement to provide comprehensive services. Now, without that legal agreement, the mission of the library is fulfilled by state statute and city code in remaining forever free to the inhabitants of Grand Island and extending services through fees. My advice to other libraries is, if you're taking a look at, obviously in our new normal, you're taking a look at some form of program prioritization that you need to consider. Where are your dollars going? What are they being used for? Or is your mission, is it established in accordance with the mission of forming a library? Are dollars being spent in ways that are keeping you from doing the best job you can with the programs that you have for the people that are paying for the paying the taxes in the legal form that the state of Nebraska has? So non-resident user fees, in the absence of these legal agreements, are common in Nebraska and across the United States, as we found. And non-residents, we defined them as those who do not inhabit the legal boundaries of Grand Island. It's kind of a marching through process here. We wish to remain a Nebraska card participant. We've well established the significant value of our library services We decided to have a household card fee as opposed to an individual card fee. And this is where you have to acknowledge, and it was certainly reported that way, that the value of a household library card is well over $100. But that's not the practice in Nebraska. And after several possibilities were discussed, the $40 per household card was arrived at. We actually did have a non-resident fee prior to Nebraska card of $35, and that was eliminated, and we went forth with the Nebraska card. However, at this point, the citizens of Hall County who reside outside Grand Island and the citizens of Merrick and Hamilton and Howard and other counties as well, if they go through their local library to get their Nebraska card sticker, then they don't need to pay a fee. But if they don't go through their local library, in essence, they're not establishing a proof that they're paying taxes for library services, then we do assess a non-resident fee. So we're treating residents of residents of Hall County and residents of other counties in exactly the same way. At this time, we're the only accredited library in Hall County, and so in essence that means that all the residents outside of Grand Island living in Hall County, they pay a non-resident fee. And the sales tax issue, it is talked about in other libraries. It may be a reason, especially in libraries that have they have interlocal agreements with their county. It's a way for them to extend services outside the county, whether or not they participate in Nebraska card. But we decided in our case that local sales tax was not going to be an issue that we were going to compute. We would establish some limited exemptions, but there are very few. We had been talking about the fact that the county was requesting that we cap our revenues for the non-resident fee, and we decided to make that really clear that this is an issue that we need to deal with, and capping revenues has happened all by itself because there are fewer users. And in the future, we acknowledge that fees might not be necessary because there are legal means of extending service, including a future interlocal agreement with the county. But the library would entertain good faith negotiations that include mutually agreeable terms. Unilateral terms would be a thing of the past. This is the resolution. It's here for posterity in case anybody is going through the archives and wants to take a look at it. And here is the policy on issuance of non-resident cards. When you take a look at that resolution, I won't go back to it, but you'll see in that resolution that the resolution was passed in March. The fee was approved for May, and in the interim, we gave the county the opportunity to agree to an interlocal agreement that we felt was reasonable, and that was not entertained by the county. So it was a process that I believe has had very, very, very little negative impact on our ability to serve without distractions. It was understood really well by the public all along the way. There were some emotions involved in it, but as I look at other decisions that are made, typically, maybe this was one of the calmest processes that a library could ever go through, and I was really fortunate of that. And I think today our services are really strong, even though we're being cut through program prioritization budget by our city. The services that we have are pretty well defined, are within that box that the public needs service from us, and we're able to maintain good quality services instead of being constantly involved in revisiting this issue. So we're pretty happy with the process. We were really pleased, the library board and myself and the staff. We're really pleased that we were able to get through this without too much of a pain and without too many unintended consequences. Happy to answer any questions that you have.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Steve. That was actually very interesting. Yeah, I wasn't sure exactly how it was all going to come out. But it sounds like, yeah, that is very good to see definitely the step-by-step process, and I am a big proponent of the transparency of all this kind of thing, and like you did, putting it out there for the community to know what was going on and to be fully informed about how your decision was being made and why it needed to be made. I think is very important in a lot of these situations, and that if anyone does even in the future come back and say and try and be, you know, why did you do this? What a terrible thing. You've got all that, you know, history of how it actually went down that you can't really argue with. Does anybody have any questions, comments for Steve about the process on these non-residence cards that you did? You can type them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar interface. As I said earlier, if you have a microphone, you can go ahead and let me know, and I can unmute you to use that as well. There wasn't any questions during the session, Steve.
We'll see.
So
I'll think if I can come up with a question.
Yeah, the one thing that I was thinking about that you actually ended up responding to was what other options besides the Grand Island Public Library did these people have? What is the closest other library they could have possibly gone to? You know, how that all worked out. But it looks like you pretty much had that covered with your map and your information about that. And then, of course, the Nebraska card, which helps a lot of those libraries as well. They do have options.
And we sent out a letter to all of the libraries in the area to encourage them, under the circumstances that were changing for us, to encourage them to take a look at Nebraska card.
Yeah.
Because their citizens would have free access to our library if only their libraries would join Nebraska card.
Right,
and
yeah.
we could establish the link and the sticker or whatever means there is out there that I don't pay enough attention to myself, but our staff sure does.
Yeah,
and
there's either cards or stickers, yeah, whichever way the libraries want to go.
You know, that's just one thing I think the state's going to have to take a look at as well is libraries that have interlocal agreements like ours that wasn't up to the per capita that city residents were paying. It's a fact of life. We in the state, I think over the years, we've just got used to saying, "Oh, well, no, it's not enough, but it's good enough." And it's a growing and learning lesson, I think, for our state.
Yeah, I wish more libraries would jump onto the Nebraska card. Yeah, it could make things a lot easier. There's a lot of people that travel across the state or need to travel through, or going from living in one town and driving an hour and a half to work in another one. It would really make it very useful for a lot of people.
Almost all libraries in our area, I think, would benefit from Nebraska card, and because their citizens would make just as much use of their local library, but would also make use of this card Nebraska card to use our library when they're in Grand Island. And, you know, there are pros and cons to larger forms of cooperation, whether they're formal or informal. Like a Nebraska card is less formal than maybe some other states.
Right. Well, it doesn't look like any questions have come in while we've been chatting. One comment, though, just very interesting, and thank you for the presentation. I agree, yes.
Oh, thank you very much for the comment.
Yeah. And the session has been recorded, so as I've said previously, we get a lot more activity on our sessions after recording. We know not everyone can join us here on Wednesday mornings, so I'm sure we'll get this posted up, the recording up there. I'll also talk to maybe Richard or Library Development here about getting a link to this put onto the pages we have already about on our website that are about boards of trustees and the library board manual and those kind of things. So, because I think this could be very useful as you said, a case study for other libraries to look at to figure out how are we going to deal with this, whatever their new issue is that has come up in their libraries.
Well, I did want to conclude with this, that in the 35 years that I've been involved with trustees, our board in Grand Island has taken such a positive leadership approach, and whether it's this issue or it's strategic planning or a new long-range plan that we're going through right now, they're just absolutely embedded in the best, wisest decisions that could be made. And it's like, it's not the perfect storm, it's the perfect dream.
Well, that's great. And I think it also helps that having you, a director like yourself, who works on helping them be the best they can be, the best board, and working together rather than thinking of working against each other. Not
and
communicating
what a great
enough.
encouragement, if that's all somebody can take from this, is that I'm encouraged every day because my board has such a positive strength.
And just the willingness to communicate and listen makes a huge difference in a lot of these situations as well.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, we're almost at the top of the hour. No urgent questions or comments have come through, so I think we will wrap it up for today's NCompass Live. Thank you very much, Steve. I'm going to pull back control here again to my computer. Maybe. There it goes.
Oh, yes.
There we are. Yeah, thank you very much for sharing this with us. I was
You're welcome.
this was actually a tip from Richard Miller, the Director of Library Development here at the Commission, saying you need to get this on the show. This would be a great topic. So I'll have to thank him, too, for pointing you in my direction. And the recording will be posted. You just email me the slides when you get a chance, and we'll get those up. And probably this afternoon, people will be able to go to look at the recording.
Excellent.
Great. So thank you, everyone, for attending this morning. And I hope you join us next week, next Wednesday, when we are going to have Sally Gardner-Reed, who is the Executive Director of ALTAF, the Association of Library Trustees, Advocates, Friends, and Foundations. And she's going to talk to us about what ALTAF's been doing. She was on here with us a couple of years ago, in 2009, I believe. So we brought her back again for an update on what ALTAF does and certain things that are specific here to Nebraska and our participation in ALTAF and how you can benefit from that. So sign up and join us to hear what Sally has to say next week. Other than that, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time on NCompass Live. Bye-bye.